past few weeks, we've been talking about this topic of one of a kind and looking at some stories in the Bible about how God had used individuals in a special way, a unique way. And through this, we've been talking about how we are all individuals that God has created and that God can use us to do some specific things, some important things in our life, things that are a part of His purpose for us and a part of our life. And so today we're just going to kind of jump in and just kind of get going with a story that's kind of a long story. Denise was talking about you guys coming in and looking for a seat. It's kind of weird for me being here too, and you're not where you normally are. We had a wedding at the church yesterday. Justin and Jennifer got married, some family here in our church. And, it's good when you get married to have a center aisle and a bride can walk down it and things. And so we split the chairs up, and then it was like, hey, we'll set them back up later. And like that. So pray for them. We also had other people, significant things. We had a couple, Mark and Pam Bacchetti. They play in the band. 25-year wedding anniversary coming up here this week or so. So congratulations to them. And we'll pray that one day Justin and Jennifer have that 25-year, and hopefully they'll still live around here and we'll know them and things like that. All right, so either way, we're through. God's going to use us. God can use us. We're individuals, right? But there are things that God can do. And, the story of the Bible, the story of these past few weeks has not been us talking about five perfect people that were in the Bible that, God was able to use because they were so exceptional. It was a thing of 5 different people that we're looking at, and they had their own story. They had things that were going on, and what happened with them is that they had decided that they were going to look to God for support in their life. They were going to look to God to find their self-worth. They were going to look to God and follow God and know God in their life and just trust God to work in their lives. And so we've been talking about how if we will trust God in our own lives, that God can do what it is that He's trying to do. And so we've looked at people, David, Solomon. Today we're looking at Esther. I'm not saying that we are going to do the noteworthy, unbelievable things that they did, right? Because they had a specific design in their life and God wanted to use them. And we may not be, kings and, this kind of stuff. Noah building an ark. We don't have to do what they did. We just have to do what God has planned for us. And so, like that. Listen, today we're looking at this story of a lady named Esther. And her story, it's found in the Old Testament, about the middle of the Old Testament. It's this unbelievable story. Her story, this story would make for a great movie. It's, they've worked on that and stuff. It's kind of like a Shakespearean play. There's so many things that are piled up within this story of, intrigue and sinister plots and plans and twists and turns within the story. It's great reading. It's 10 chapters. You could we're going to talk about and just kind of look at the broad view of her whole story, the whole book here this morning. But take some time this week and just kind of read through it. And it's as good as, who's famous. It's as good as any Tom Clancy novel or whoever your favorite author is and stuff like that. You can find good stories in the Bible. And so here's the deal. We're going to step in. We'll start chapter 1. And there's a lot of kind of verses in this week. So follow along with me. Take a look in your program, your teaching notes and things there. And then let's just talk about and ask God to speak to us through the story of Esther. So we start off, it says that these events happened in the days of King Xerxes, who reigned over 127 provinces stretching from India to Ethiopia. From India to Ethiopia is this king. You've seen movies, maybe 300 and some of these things of old stories and movies and things. I have a map here. Let's see if that'll pull up. Basically, this guy was the king of the known world at the time. The Bible is talking about from India all the way over Ethiopia. This guy had some influence. This guy was a powerful leader. He was the world leader, the world power at the time. He's the king of this much area, And, people didn't get around. They don't travel back in the day like we do now. So people are living in the middle of this kingdom, and it's like as far as they can imagine of going is what this man is authority over of. And so Esther's story takes place in the time of his rule. And here's what happens. At the time, Xerxes ruled his empire from his royal throne in the fortress of Susa. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials. He invited all the military officers of Persia and Media, as well as the princes and nobles of provinces. The celebration lasted 180 days. How long is 180 days? It's a 6-month party that this guy's throwing. A tremendous display of the opulent wealth of his empire and the pomp and splendor of his majesty. When it was all over, the king gave a banquet for all the people. So, it was like there was the party and then there was the after party of what was taking place. And this banquet takes place from the greatest to the least who were in the fortress of Susa. And it lasted another week. It lasted for 7 days and was held in the courtyard of the palace garden. The courtyard was beautifully decorated with white cotton curtains and blue hangings, which were fastened with white linen cords and purple ribbons to silver rugs and embedded with marble pillars. Gold and silver couches stood on the mosaic pavement of the porphyry. Marble, mother of pearl, other costly stones. Listen, trying to describe what was taking place, that the Bible, it doesn't just tell us of the colors of the things that were around so that we can, figure out how to decorate our church and match that, right? It's telling us of the color that was there, showing us how much money the king had, how rich and how wealthy he was, because people didn't have these kinds of colors in their homes. They couldn't go to the mall, they couldn't go to Walmart or wherever and get the fabric. It was expensive to have these colors. Most of the things, they weren't dyed with the purples and the reds and the beautiful colors. That was for the rich people. So it's just telling us, hey, this is what it looked like to be in his kingdom. It goes on and says that drinks were served in gold goblets of many designs. There was an abundance of royal wine reflecting the king's generosity. By edict of the king, no limits were placed on the drinking, for the king had instructed all of his palace officials to serve each man as much as he wanted. So the king has this celebration that lasts for 6 months in the 3rd year of his reign. That's wrapping up, and he brings in the close people there at the palace. They're going to have another 7 days of just living it up, of partying, eating, feasting, drinking, showing off his wealth, showing everybody, I am Xerxes. I am king and ruler. There's no one that's greater than me. There's no one that's more generous than me. There's no one that's more powerful than me. A big show and a test of who he is. And the story goes on in the passage that what he ends up doing at the very end, he's done everything else that he can do. So the last thing that he's going to do is he's going to call his wife to come forward, the queen. And he summons the queen to come into the presence of these nobles, the princes and the people that are here. And it wasn't really that he was wanting to talk to her or see her or wanting her to enjoy the party, but he was wanting everybody to see how beautiful she was. It's the drapes and the purple and the gold goblets and the wine that's flowing so much. And the last thing for them to see is how beautiful his wife is, the queen. Only the trouble of it is, whenever he calls Queen Vashti, she doesn't show up, she doesn't come, because she understands what's going on, and it kind of ticks her off a little bit. And she says, hey, you know what? This guy's probably drunk. It's whatever's going on around here and stuff. I'm not going to go. I'm not going to show up. The king, he was happy. It was fine with it. Now, this is the most powerful man in the world. He wasn't happy. He talks to the people that's around him. The princes and the nobles that were around him, they weren't happy either. They have this conversation and they're saying, listen, king, if you let your wife get away with this, of treating you this way and behaving this way, then the first thing you know, word's going to get back. My wife's going to find out about it. And my wife's going to be telling me, hey, I'll do what I want. We're going to lose control. We're going to lose rule with these people in our lives. Next thing you know, they're going to want to vote. They're going to want to have all these rights. They're going to want equal pay. They're going to... See, this was back in the day when women didn't have the rights, right? Things weren't the same. And they were worried about it. God never intended it for it to be that way, by the way. He's not a male chauvinist. The king said, that's it, you're done. You're no longer queen. The punishment for her was to be put in a place to where you can never again be in my presence. And so King Vashti is done. She's gone. Who knows the rest of her story and what happened? So that's where Esther's come in. Because after a few, days, a period of time, the king has stopped and he's had a chance to think about, hey, I no longer have a queen. This isn't right. I'm kind of lonely. It's this, that, or whatever. What are we going to do about it? So again, he talks to the people that's around him. One of the things that you find in the story is these guys cannot make decisions on their own. Every time you turn around, they're asking somebody else for advice. And so the people say, hey, I saw this show on TV. It's called The Bachelor. Let's do something like that. Only instead of it being like The Bachelor, it's going to be kind of The Bachelor meets the draft. Like a wartime draft. To where whenever somebody's coming, you don't have a choice about it. They come up with this idea. You're a powerful king. There's a lot of ground out here. There's a lot to your kingdom, a lot of provinces. Let's have the prettiest virgins be brought to you and let you pick out a new queen. King thinks, hey, that's not a bad idea, right? So they begin this thing to where they're going to have these girls come up. They're going to look around and find them. They're not really going to give them a choice. The king wants you here, you're going to be here. And so we read on in the Bible, and we see Esther enter into the story. It says, at that time, this is in Esther chapter 2, at that time there was a Jewish man in the fortress of Susa whose name was Mordecai of Jair. He was from the tribe of Benjamin and was a descendant of Kish and Shimei. His family had been among those who, with King Jehoiakim of Judah, had been exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar. All right, here's the deal, the story. Israel had been a group of people who were in Israel. Back at Jerusalem, back there in their home country. There was a time to when King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian army had come forth and waged war against them and defeated them and overran them. What happened and began to happen after that time is that there were some of the people in Israel were taken and removed from their homes and taken to the foreign lands, to Babylon, to the other areas where they were conquering them from. And so Mordecai ends up being a part of a group of people who fits into that category. They're exiles, they're refugees, they're people who are forcibly taken from their homeland and forced to live in a foreign country. Does that sound like fun to you? It's people who, they no longer have their freedom, they no longer have their customs. Even for the Jewish people, their religion was taken away from them, and the temple and all of the things that went along with it. So this is the circumstance of what's taken place. Now, here's what happened. After a while, the Babylonian Empire got defeated by the Persian Empire, and so now it's not even that these Jewish people are under the control of the people that defeated them the first time, but now Mordecai and the other exiles are forced to be in this other land. So King Xerxes is setting over them, and that's the circumstance and what was taking place. Now, here's what happened. This man, Mordecai, had a very beautiful, lovely young cousin, Hadassah, who is also called Esther. When Esther's father and mother died, Mordecai adopted her into his family and raised her as his own daughter. So she was pretty. She got tabbed to pick to be able to go into this thing she had no control over. And so they took her, and for a year, they took her and gave her the spa treatment. She went prepared. She didn't go from where she was living right into King Xerxes' presence, but she went, they prepared her, they're doing all of these things for her to be able to go before the king, to meet, to have an audition, and to see if the king was going to pick her. Well, here's the deal. Lo and behold, the king did pick her. She ends up being the one. And it says that the king loved Esther more than any other young woman. He was so delighted with her that he set the royal crown on her head and declared her king instead of Vashti. And so this refugee orphan ends up coming into the king's presence and ends up getting picked by the king. Here was the thing. When she was going and she was getting picked, her cousin, adopted father, Mordecai, he told her, listen, you keep it under wraps who you are and where you're from. Said, listen, whenever you show up in this king's palace and things, it is not going to be an asset for you to tell them that you're a Jewish lady. Because we're the outsiders, we're the captives, we're the ones that are visitors here. So you just keep that under wraps. And so she did as her adopted father, cousin, told her to do. Well, so that's the story with Esther and how things are getting set up. There's another story that's going on in the book. And it has to do with a man named Haman. Haman was a guy that was a part of the government. Haman was a guy that was a part of the king's inner circle. Haman was like the chief of staff. He's like the number 2 guy. I mean, he's way up there in rank, in authority, and in position. And Haman was a guy who really enjoyed the position that he held. You know, sometimes people, give somebody a little bit of power and they think they're a general and that kind of thing, think they're a king. That's kind of where Haman was coming from. Haman was spending his time rising the ladder, climbing the corporate ladder, being in control and things, getting in tight with the king. And he enjoyed the respect. He enjoyed the fear that he instilled in other people. He enjoyed having people stand up and bow down, salute, that kind of thing. The trouble of it is that there was somebody who did not bow down to Haman. His name was Mordecai. It really frosted Haman that he could go through the town, he could come out of the palace, he could go through, and everyone else gave him the respect that he deserved, the respect that he demanded, the respect that was his, except for this one Jewish man named Mordecai. And we were reading the story that, with Mordecai, he's Jewish. He believes in God, and it troubles him to bow down to someone else other than God. Haman doesn't care. He goes and he talks to his group of friends because, like King Xerxes, he can't make a decision on his own. And so the people, they start talking, and they're like, listen, man, this guy Mordecai, he's one of those Jewish men. He's part of that Jewish group, and they're all a little bit weird. There's something off with all of them. And, hey, let's just take care of this problem. Instead of just dealing with this guy Mordecai, let's just do a little genocide. Let's just wipe them all out. Haman's like, doesn't sound like an overreaction to me. Let's go ahead and do that. So he goes up to the king. He says to the king, King, listen, we got these problems. We got these people that don't bow down, don't follow you. They don't give you the respect that you deserve. They think that they're better than we are. They're living right here in our midst. So what I'd like to do is do something. Let's take care of this problem. Haman says, I'll put money into your coffers if you will allow me to do this thing, and we will eradicate the problem that we're having with these Jewish people. And the king says, hey, that's fine. Keep your money. It sounds good to me. Go ahead. Do your genocide thing. Whatever makes you happy. So they come up with a plan, with a plot. And here's the story. Dispatches were sent by swift messengers into all the provinces of the empire. You remember how big that province, the kingdom was, right? All the provinces of the empire, giving the order that all Jews, young, old, including women and children, must be killed, slaughtered, and annihilated on a single day. Now, we could go into a lot of things about like spiritual lessons and things, and we can talk about the Holocaust and things that have happened in our history and what have you. It was going on in generations of ours and seeing those things, and it was going on way back in history. And I really think that we could look at that and say that, hey, there must be something with this Jewish hatred. And I think that there's something with the devil kind of standing against God, God using the Jewish people to be able to bring Jesus, and all of these things. But these are the things that were going on. These guys were kind of sick and twisted. I cannot imagine just going and killing men, women, and children just because I don't like where they were born. They made a game out of it. The Bible kind of talks about how they cast lots. They threw the dice to figure out a day when it was going to happen. It was like this atrocious atrocity that's going to take place. And they're like, all right, man, let's see what day it's going to land on, because it says in a single day. Here's what happened. The dice came up. It was scheduled to happen on March 7th of the next year. The property of the Jews would be given to those who killed them. The bad part of it is, well, how can you just say the bad part? It's all bad. It's terrible. But can you imagine being a Jewish person and finding out what's coming down the pike, right? You hear, hey, next March, things are going to get bad. They're going to kill us all. Now, it's bad enough that they're going to do this terrible thing, but then they're going to let you think about it and live with it and look forward to it. Mordecai found out about what was going to go on, and man, he lost it, right? It's mourning, it's sadness, it's sackcloth and ashes, it's the whole 9 yards of just being terrible and crying out to God, because he's a religious person, right? And the Jewish religion was with the one true God, and so he's crying out and he's pleading with God, and he's like, what's going to happen? Word came in to Esther that something was wrong with Mordecai. And, she never told anybody that she was Jewish, but she was the queen, and she could keep tabs on who she wanted to keep tabs with. She had people that served her, and so she's talking to her servants and saying, hey, something's not right. I see outside the palace here, Mordecai's, he's wearing that crazy outfit, and he's praying, and he's cried out, and, I can tell something's wrong. Somebody go to him. I've got to get word and find out what's taking place. So that's the circumstance about what's going on. And then Esther has this conversation with her cousin, with her stepfather. It says, all the king's officials and even the people in the provinces know that anyone who... All right, I'm sorry. Yeah, so you stay with me. This is the conversation and how this is going. She gets word from Mordecai and finds out what's taking place, and he's saying, hey, you're going to have to do something. You need to go and talk to the king. And Esther says, hey, I can't just go and talk to the king. This is how she replied. All the king's officials and even the people in the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his golden scepter. And the king has not called for me for over 30 days. So Esther's talking to her dad, to her cousin, and she's saying, what's going on? And he's saying, hey, all of us Jews are in trouble. They're going to kill us. They've got this day. They're going to wipe us all out. Somebody's got to do something. You're the queen. You need to go to the king and talk to the king. You're the one that's going to have to do something. And she says, listen, you don't understand. I didn't get into this relationship by choice. I was drafted into this relationship. And this husband of mine, the guy that I'm married to, things don't work. This is not a normal relationship. Everybody knows that if I just show up and the king hasn't called me or summoned me or asked me to come, if I just show up, what's going to happen is one of two things. He's going to be glad to see me and hold out his golden scepter, right? This whatever golden, you got one at home. You know what that looks like? He's going to hold out this golden scepter, and then things are going to be cool. But if he is not glad to see me, then they're going to kill me. And she's like, oh, by the way, do you realize that the queen whose place I took, she kind of didn't do things by the book, and it upset him, and she's not around here anymore. And Mordecai said these words. Mordecai sent this reply to Esther, and he said, don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all the other Jews are killed. said that if you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place. But you and your relatives will die. Then he said this, who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this? If you don't do something, God's going to do something through somebody else. You're going to suffer. You're not going to stay safe. You're not going to escape the punishment, the penalty, that everybody else is going to have. And who knows if God didn't make you the queen and put you in the position for just this very thing and just this very moment. Let's take a time out for a second and stop and think about what it is that we're talking about. We have said that we are unique. We're one of a kind. That God has made us and created us for a specific purpose and for, that He can do some great things in our lives and through us. I wonder if Esther was here today, what she would say to us about feeling unique, about feeling special. I can just imagine her being here and saying, you know what? Yeah, I feel real special and real unique. Here I am in a foreign land, a foreign country. I'm a refugee here. I'm an exile here. I can't even tell people who I am and where I come from, my identity. I think she could probably say, listen, yeah, I feel real unique. My parents are gone. Other people, they have a mom and dad, and even where we live, they have family that can be there. But here I am, an orphan girl, all alone. I think she could say, yeah, I feel real good. I feel real unique. I feel real special. Other girls my age are getting married and having kids and having a relationship. And I'm married to a person that I had no choice in marrying him. And I can't even go see him. I'm at his mercy. And I'm sure that Esther would say, I feel real unique. As a kid, we'd kind of roughhouse and play around or whatever. And football and tackle, and had this thing I'd call it, just dog pile on somebody. You know what that is? Right? Just somebody's there, and man, you go and everybody that's there just piles on top of them. I think that Esther probably felt like life was piling up on top of her. I mean, can you see this picture and think about the things that she's dealt with in her life and where she ends up finding herself? And now, one more thing, the final thing on the dog pile is that I'm going to have to go to the king and talk to the king and risk my life. There is a very real chance that I'm not going to live through this. I'm not going to make through it. Sometimes whenever we feel special or we feel unique, we feel alone. It's not a good thing. As we talk about this stuff in this story and in this series and things, I think for most of us, there's probably things in our own life that we could say, yeah, you know what? I understand who I am, but I don't feel very capable of doing anything. I don't feel very good about it. I'm unique. I'm all alone. And maybe it's the circumstances in your life and the things that you're having to deal with that cause you just to be at a point and feel like, man, why me? Why does this have to happen? Why is it one more thing and one more time? And the bills are piling up and nothing's working out in school. Nothing's working out at home and your kids are driving you crazy. You feel all alone, and you're dealing with the emotions that you have in your life and the emptiness that you have in your life, and the people that are around you aren't really helping you any. You just feel like you're all alone and nowhere to turn to and without any hope. For some of us, we can maybe look and say, it's just lonely at the top. Here I am trying to run things in the house and help things in my house, and I get, the kids are there, but I can't relate to the kids. They can't relate to me because I'm the mom and there's nobody else here and I'm trying to go it on my own. And we feel like that there's just nobody there that can help us. You know, the deal with the story of Esther, the cool thing about it to me is that the story of Esther is not about this perfect girl that had everything worked out. The story of Esther is about a simple girl that was dealing with a lot of circumstances in her life, but was able to make the right decision to be able to do something great. I mean, it wasn't that she was a perfect Virgin Mary kind of poster child, holy girl. It was just that she was a girl, an ordinary girl that God put in the right spot to be able to do something special. Here's the point of the whole message. Here's the point of Esther's life and the encouragement for us. And it is this: for us to be used by God to fulfill His purposes in our life, we'll have to be willing to say yes. We'll have to be willing to say yes. In this passage, Esther thinks, she listens to Mordecai, and then she says, all right, listen, here's the deal. Send this reply to him. Go and gather all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. And then, though it's against the law, I will go see the king. If I must die, I must die. So Mordecai went and escaped when all the other Jews are killed. Where'd I go here? My battery just went dead. So Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. Here's what happens. This is Esther ends up going to the king. She says, all right, I'm going to do it. We're going to do it. Fast, pray, 3 days from now, I'm going to go into the king's presence. So the time comes. She's made her decision. Live or die. It's out of my hands. It's in God's hands. You know, in the entire book of Esther, God's name is not mentioned one time. The only time that we hear of anything of talking with God is when she's saying here, hey, pray and fast, and here in 3 days, we're going to trust this to God. And that's how the thing plays out. She goes to the king. The king offers out the golden scepter. She doesn't die. The king says, my queen, what do you want? What are you doing here? It's so good to see you. She's like, well, if it's so good to see me, how come I haven't seen you for 30 days? He says, what is it that you want? She says, king of mine, love, dear, come to dinner. I want to prepare a dinner. I want you to come, and oh, by the way, I want you to bring Haman with you. Now, I'm sure the king was like, okay, a little bit strange, but you're my queen. He offers her up to half of his kingdom, and he says, so, we'll come. So they come and they eat dinner. And the king says, okay, now what is it that you really want? Esther says, listen, if it pleases you and if you would entertain me, I'd like for you to come to dinner once again. Come to dinner, you and Haman. Come back tomorrow night and we'll eat again. King says, okay, it's a little bit strange, but I'll go along, I'll play this game. So can you picture Haman whenever he's leaving the king's presence and the queen's presence? I mean, here the queen comes in, she takes this risk, life in her own hands, and she's like, she wanted to have dinner with me. Man, I have really hit it big. I mean, I have got things straightened out. And that day, whenever Haman's leaving from this dinner with just him and the queen and the king, who does he see but Mordecai? And once again, this guy Mordecai won't bow down and won't give the respect to Haman that he believes he deserves. He goes back and he talks to his friends and the people that are around him, and they say, listen, why is it that we have to wait until March to take care of this Mordecai guy? Let's go ahead and take care of him now, and we'll deal with the rest of that bad seed later on. They said, why don't you just go out here and have some gallows built? And we'll just hang this guy, and you won't have to put up with him any longer. Sounds like a good idea to me, so he orders that a gallows be built 75 feet high. Haman leaves. He goes back, going to go to the king and find out if it's okay. I've got a problem with this guy. I'm going to hang him. Only here's the deal and what was going on. At the time when Haman was going to go back to the king had been trying to go to sleep, and he had trouble. He couldn't sleep. So he got up and he had one of his assistants to bring the records of the kingdom and just start reading the most boring thing that he could find to help to put him back to sleep. And they open up the page in the book of the records of everything that's been going on. And what do they read about a time when there was an assassination plot for the king? There was a time when there were a couple people, they were going to try to get in and they were going to try to kill him. Somebody heard about it, told the king, told the authorities about it. They investigated. Sure enough, somebody was going to try to kill the king, so they hanged the guys. And the king says, listen, did we ever do anything for that guy that saved my life, right? That did this. They're looking through the book and said, no, it doesn't look like we've had anything. I can't see to where we did anything to help this guy out. The king says, well, that's not right. We're going to have to do something. He looks out, he sees Haman outside. He said, has Haman come in. He says, Haman, listen, what would you do for somebody that the king wanted to honor? I mean, if somebody had done something and the king wanted to recognize it, what do you think I ought to do? Well, Haman, thinking that, hey, the queen's asking me for dinner, and this king, he's got this thing for me, must be talking about me. So Haman says, I'll tell you what I'd do, king, if I were you. I'd take the robe off my back, I'd put it on the guy. I'd put the guy on the king's horse. I'd put the king's seal on the horse. And I would have somebody lead this man around town, leading the horse and saying, this is what happens to the man that the king wants to honor. And let everybody know that this is a person that the king appreciates and respects. And everybody will see it. Nobody wears the king's robe. Nobody sits on the king's horse. But the king says, man, you hit the nail on the head. I want you to go out and get this guy Mordecai. And I want you to take him around the city. And I want this to be done. Can you imagine what's going on with Haman? Can you see the story start to turn? How God is working through the story and God is allowing. And so Haman goes out. He takes Mordecai around the town. I can see him just that next day coming back in. He just comes back in and his friends are like, man, you're in trouble because this guy Mordecai, I don't think you're going to be able to do anything with this guy. Every time something, you're trying to do bad things, but he's got some awful good luck. Oh, by the way, there's somebody at the door. Time to go to dinner. So here Haman comes back in with the king, confused and trying to figure out and seething. I can't imagine how mad he would have been. See, but the thing of it is, he didn't know how bad it was going to get yet. Because they go to dinner, and the king says, okay, queen, enough with the suspense. What is it that you're wanting from me? Esther goes into this story about how much she is in danger. How there's somebody that's trying to kill her, and not only her, but all of her people. She says, it turns out, king, that I'm a Jewish girl. You have a Jewish wife. And the king says, I can't believe somebody that would try to hurt the queen. Who is it that's trying to do this? And Queen Esther says, it's this guy Haman right here. King gets disgusted. He gets up, he steps out of the room, he's going to get a drink of water. Haman's like freaking out. He jumps up, he's going to go to the queen, he's going to beg for his life. He knows that things aren't going very good. And in his haste, just as he was getting over to the queen, he trips, he falls down and falls forward towards the queen. Just so happens that the king's coming back in at just that moment. And the king says, are you kidding me? In the presence of the king, you're going to try to hurt my wife? You are this bold, this audacious? You know what? I heard there's a gallows that's been built right out here. 75 feet high. They took Haman out. They hung him on the gallows. Turns out that when the king makes an order, it can't be rescinded. When he puts his seal on something, it's law. It can't be changed. So Esther and Mordecai, they come before the king and they're like, hey, we've got to do something about, because March 7th, people are going to kill the Jewish people, right, and take their stuff. So the only thing the king could do is make another edict and say the Jewish people have a right to be able to defend themselves, and if anybody comes and wants to try to harm them, they have the authority to fight back against them, to overtake them, and to take their money. take their plunder. And so God saved the day. You see, this is a story not about awesome people, but about an awesome God that was in control, that through His sovereignty, through His power, He was able to thwart the evil plan and to give us this lesson of what can happen in our lives. Not if we will just become perfect, but if we will come to a place to where we'll be willing to say yes to God, we'll be willing to do the things that God is calling us to do or asking us to do. We may feel like everything's against us, and we may feel like that we're incapable of doing all these things. We may feel like that the deck is stacked against us, but it could be that the very hand that we've been dealt could be the thing that would put us in the place for God to be able to do what He's trying to do in this world. That God, in spite of our circumstances, can work through us and work with us if we just be willing to say yes and to follow God. Sometimes I think that we have trouble and we struggle. And in part, it's because we're really not paying attention to the things that's going on around us. Sometimes I think that God might be trying to get us to do some things or to be willing to say yes and do some things, but we are so oblivious to the things of what's going on around others. The only thing that we can think about is what's going on in our world. You know, Esther could have just been overwhelmed with those things and missed out on the opportunities that God has. I talked a little bit earlier, there are people that serve around church. You know, and it never fails that through the week there are things that are taking place, and we can get so caught up in how busy our schedules are, and we can get so caught up in how much stress we have with other things that it could be easy for us to say, you know what, somebody else is going to have to do it because I just don't have time. Somebody else is going to have to do it because they're just more talented than me. Somebody else is going to do it because it's not that important, or so easy for us to say no. When the only thing that God wants us to do is to trust Him and be willing to say yes. The only thing God's wanting us to do is to listen for His voice in our everyday, to be able to have an opportunity to say yes. Grab your program. Look on the back of your program on the bottom. Some of the programs have a yellow star. Anybody see a yellow star on the back of their program? Here's the deal. This week, we're going to help and give you an opportunity to say yes, to listen to God and look for an opportunity to be able to do something. If you end up with a program and it's got a gold star on the back of it, what I want you to do is at the end of service, take that program to the connection booth, and we're going to give you $10. And here's the deal with the $10. You have to use it to bless someone else at some point this week. What I want you to do, if you have that star, the point of the thing is to get you to think, hey, I have this, I can do something, I have to do something. God, what is it that you want me to do? And to look for an opportunity to use that $10, and listen, I really don't care what you do with it. Try and bless someone, help someone, however it goes. Then if you're on Facebook, I want you to go to the church Facebook page. I want you to make a comment on the experience and what happened and what you did with your $10 to be able to bless them and protect people's identity, or don't embarrass somebody or whatever. But talk about what's taken place. Here's what I believe with all of my heart. I believe that God is giving us opportunities every week to represent Him, to love other people, to help other people, that we can be God's ambassador as we go forward, and that we can help others. Now, you may not have gotten a gold star, all right? So here's what I want you to do. Take whatever it is you have and look for an opportunity to be able to help someone. You may have $10, do $10. You may have 10 minutes, use the 10 minutes. Look for an opportunity to be able to say yes to God, to be able to help someone, to be able to be the person that God wants you to be. Mordecai said to Esther, you can do what you want. God's going to provide, and God's going to do what God's going to do. See, I believe that's true with us too. We can be selfish, we can be self-centered, we can ignore God, we can say no. God is still going to do what He's going to do. The only question is, am I going to be excluded from it, or am I going to be involved with it? The power of 3 letters. The power of a small word. The power of yes. Pray with me. Dear Heavenly Father, God, we give you this time. It's a long story, a big story for us to be talking about so many things here this morning. God, I pray that through the circumstances of what you did in Esther's life, God, I pray that we could find encouragement and direction. And God, I pray that we could turn to you, to trust in you, to find our hope, to find a foundation for our life, to find our self-worth. And God, that we could be encouraged to know that you love us and that you can use us and that you have a desire to work through us. I pray that you would bless our church. And God, help us all to see and have an opportunity this week to be able to say yes to you, and that your Spirit might work through us. We love you. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.